All right, Doug. So yesterday we talked about war and specifically the likelihood of a war with China. In yesterday's episode, you mentioned five specific types of war: economic war, electronic war, biological war, psychological war, and hot war. And you said yesterday something I thought was very interesting, which was that the only likelihood that we might actually win in a war against China would be if it actually were a hot war. So I just want to follow up on that, get your thoughts on why you think that is and what it would look like.
Yeah, well, these other four kinds of wars that we mentioned are actually much more devastating and much more likely in many ways. But unfortunately, that being said, uh, the US, I think, at this point would have to come out on the losing end of those things. So, these generals are always wargaming and planning, and they'll see a more or less conventional hot war as being the way to the way to play this out. So what does that mean? Because of the four things that we mentioned yesterday, they all have components in the hardware world. They all have effects with planes and ships and tanks and the rest of that type of thing. But I guess we ought to talk about now with hot war is the hardware kind of war that kind of looks conventional with all this military junk. And going back to China again, how is that likely to start? Uh, maybe with Taiwan. I mean, the Chinese have reintegrated or are in process of trying to Hong Kong into China. And Xinjiang with the Uyghurs, it's largely a Mohammedan, I should say, province. It's funny, they've even captured me with their words. Uh,
Despite your
so,
best efforts.
yeah, I know, that's right. That's why resistance is futile. There's proof of it. Uh, so that they are they're probably, and from a long-term point of view, probably it's the smart thing to do is wipe out everybody that now lives in Xinjiang because they're not Han Chinese. They're the kind of people that live in places like Central Asia, and they're Muslims. See, look at I did it again. Uh, so
There are a lot of, aren't there a lot of refugees and people from Afghanistan or that are connected sort of ethnically with and religiously with people in Afghanistan that live in that area?
absolutely,
Mm.
religiously, ethnically, linguistically,
Mm.
culturally, and the Han Chinese are very different from all of them. And of course, every group in the world is racist. And of course, it's horrible to be racist. It's just the genetic fact of life. Every single group that you meet everywhere, they can be very nice as individuals, get along well, even in small groups. But Africans are unbelievably racist. So are Chinese. So is everybody. In fact, the least racist people in the world are Caucasian of European extraction. So it's absolutely perverse how everything's been turned on its head. But that's a different subject. I guess we could talk about racism, which is a very hot topic today. But we're talking about hot war revolving around hardware. And where's the next big example of it right now going to be? Well, right now it's happening between Azerbaijan and Armenia, where they're killing each other's soldiers, blowing each other's tanks up.
I was going
Maybe
to
they,
ask you about that. Like, this is the kind of thing, it seems like a small territorial conflict that, long-standing territorial disputes, which is what a lot of the wars kind of start off as. I mean, even you talk about Taiwan and China, that's a long-standing territorial dispute. And then I was reading about that this morning, and I saw that a Turkish jet shot down an Armenian warplane this morning, and you see it sort of expanding quickly, there. And how could something like that that specifically even spiral out of control to such an extent that it could draw larger countries in. I mean, certainly we see Russia being pulled in potentially.
Yeah, because these are two of their ex republics for the Soviet Union. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And of course, the US has to stick its nose into something. And well, you know, it's long been said that war is nature's way of teaching Americans geography.
Oh, that's
We
terrible.
know where these places were, and unless we send soldiers over there. So, you know,
Mm.
any of these things can get out of control, especially now with the economy on the edge of collapse. Um, if you have a war that unites the people, which they say for some reason is good, I think it's bad. Could talk about that some other time, and distracts people from the economic problems. Yeah, sure. That war is likely to spin out of control. Not a prediction, but it's,
Mm.
you know, but good odds of it happening. But with China, the question is, getting back to the exact topic we're talking about, is the US has an alliance. For what reason? I don't know. There's nothing in it for us with the Taiwanese government, which basically amounts to protecting them against China. And it's just impossible to do, because how do you protect Taiwan against mainland China? I don't call it communist China, incidentally. That's a complete misnomer. China is not communist. Now, this will shock a lot of people. Communism is a socio-economic system. It's not. It used to be under Mao. It's not anymore. The means of production, it's all about the means of production being owned by the state. Almost none of it's owned by the Chinese government anymore. It's all been privatized.
Mm.
From an economic point of view, you could say that China is in many ways freer than the US is. If I was an entrepreneur, I suspect there are less regulations in China than there are here, but it's certainly not communist. So let's call it mainland China. So anyway, the US has a treaty obligation to protect Taiwan from an invasion, something which almost happened a number of times during the 50s and the 60s. So how's it going to do that? Send a couple of aircraft carrier battle groups over there. But does that make any sense at all from a military point of view? I think not, because aircraft carriers, you know, were the hot item. They were the thing during World War II, but that was 70 years ago.
Right.
And now aircraft carriers basically amount to being sitting ducks. And can be taken out with ballistic missiles easily. They can be found easily, which they couldn't be found in years past, but now they can be found easily through all kinds of things from satellites on down. So the Chinese know where they are. They can take them out with either ballistic missiles, or if they don't want to use a nuclear weapon, they can use a hypersonic missile, something coming at a carrier, or a number of them coming at a carrier group at 3,000 miles per hour. You can't defend against it. And do that, or they can swarm the things with cruise missiles. And I don't know, can the phalanx defense systems and other things like that take them out? It just depends. It's a question of numbers. It's instead of human wave tactics, which the Chinese used during the Korean War, missile wave tactics, very, very effective. So how's the U.S. going to if it gets in a war with China? I think that's probably where it's going to start, but it would lose it. I mean, it's because the Chinese are fighting for something 100 or so miles off their coast, and we're fighting on the other side of the world using these sitting duck ships.
Mm.
So forget about that. And that kind of leads to the next thing. It's actually, the way the Chinese ought to play this is the same way that Muhammad Ali played with was that Norton or Foreman that he used this against, the rope-a-dope technique. Just,
I think it was Foreman, but I could be wrong.
yeah, I can't remember. That was a long time ago too. You just let your opponent tire himself out by punch himself out, or in the case of the US, bankrupt itself with all these military adventures around the world, which bring nothing in the way of revenue in, but are immensely expensive. So if I was the Chinese, that's certainly the way I would play the US. I try to stay away from a hot war with them, which is all the more reason, of course, why they, you've got to excuse me, I've got a dog here that wants something. What am I going to do?
It's all right. We love dogs, Doug. So
I'm going to have to.
Like, I could pause it and we can come back.
I think we're going to have to. Yeah. Oh, yeah, she's just going to be a nudge.
Okay. All right. So we're back. So you're saying, so the hot war is the Chinese avoiding a hot war is good for them because, they let us do the rope-a-dope with us, essentially, let us beat ourselves up. And it seems like whether they were doing that intentionally or not, we've been doing that over the last 2 decades, spending our blood and treasure essentially all over, the Middle East.
Yeah. It's like in the old Pogo cartoon. We've met the enemy and it is us. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's our own stupidity is our greatest enemy in this regard. So, okay, so if it's going to be with the Chinese, that's where the hot war is going to start. But what kind of war do you want to fight? And what kind of war are the adversaries going to be looking to fight? Well, ideally, you want an asymmetrical warfare. Symmetrical warfare is the classic kind of warfare, like the Greeks and Romans. You line up our guys against their guys and basically battle it out.
The medieval battle lines.
Yeah, battle line against the other. But asymmetrical makes a lot more sense. And that's kind of where the world is going. Because look at this. An Arab teenager. What's an Arab teenager worth? Well, not very much, frankly. No education, no skills, nothing. But he's a young testosterone-charged male, believes in Allah, sees an enemy out there. And there's tens of millions of them, and they're enthusiastic. Now, what do we have? What we have is much, much better in quality. We've got highly trained special ops soldiers that are worth $1 million a piece.
Yeah, probably
and
more.
Any kind of a dust up, dogs. This is another.
Start right out. Okay, all right. We just had another interruption with your beautiful dogs who have now been moved outside. But yeah, we're talking about asymmetrical warfare and the cost of an American elite soldier.
Yeah, exactly. So the elite soldier is going to take out 10 or 50 of the cheap, poorly trained AK-47 armed adversary, but they've got a lot more of those things than we have of our soldiers. So that's asymmetrical warfare. It's economic in nature. And actually, talking about stupidity again, when they attack us, they'll use something cheap, like an Arab teenager. When we attack them, we use a $1 million cruise missile to destroy a mud hut, maybe with some Arab teenagers in it. So it doesn't matter whether we're on attack or defense. We're at the losing end of this, the way I see it, in asymmetrical warfare, which is the way to fly, actually. And related to this is terrorism, which is now this is kind of interesting because everybody says terrorism, that's awful, that's immoral. Well, we ought to discuss that because that's undoubtedly going to be a methodology in the future. It's very effective. It's very low cost. What is terrorism? Actually, do you know that the US government alone has 100 separate definitions for terrorism?
No, I had no idea.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Huh.
But if you look it up, you'll find that definitions of terrorism is rife. And I guess that's very convenient because it makes it choose the definition you like, and it makes it easier to accuse somebody of terrorism. And of course, that's the worst thing that you can be. It's like being well, a terrorist is automatically evil. But we got to look at this a little bit more closely because it's actually just a method of warfare, a tactic, like cavalry charges or artillery barrages. It's simply a tactic of getting the job done. Is it innately evil? Well, basically, terrorism tends to involve a civilian target for the purposes of psychologically undermining the war effort of the enemy.
Hmm.
Mostly, that's kind of the essence of it. And I could come up with a better definition. In fact, I have to for the next novel, After Assassin is Terrorist, where our hero, Charles Knight, is accused of being a terrorist. And I'll get to talk a lot about terrorists in that novel. But okay, so there's automatically collateral damage in terrorism because you're taking out supposedly innocent people. But World War II, a great part of it was about terrorism. The bombing of Dresden and Hamburg, that was state terrorism. They served no useful purpose that late in the war. And you could actually say the firebombing of Tokyo in 1945 was actually state terrorism too. So that's where the atom bombing of the cities, civilian targets.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
So,
it's just, and it's you know, when it's done by the state, of course, it's not considered bad.
no, it's not terrorism anymore.
When it's an individual.
Especially since we're the good guys. I mean, we have God on our side. Of course, now even the Germans have God on their side. So
Right.
I'm a freedom fighter. You're a rebel. He's a terrorist.
Exactly.
And that's pretty much the way it breaks down. So, I mean, I think if you're going to talk about these things, you've got to call a spade a spade. And I think that's part of it.
But one of the things you mentioned yesterday was about this terrorism part. You said there's the idea of keeping the civilian population out of war, really ended. I think you said after World War I, and that it was really at that point. Before that, it was at least for in Western civilization for a great period of time. The idea was you kept it between the participants, and then that's changed in little bits and in big ways over time. And you suspect that whatever would happen in this war with China would be very much oriented toward, no holds barred, I guess, on civilian populations.
Yeah, that is one of the many very nice things about Western civilization, practically unique to Western civilization, is since the end of the 30 Years' War, which was pretty brutal, took place mostly in Germany, and it was all about basically mass murder. But then the treaty that ended that war in, I think, Westphalia, 1648, from that point forward, there was very little in the way of wanton destruction of civilian populations. It was basically army against army then until World War I. So for what that's worth, not much today. So terrorism. One area of terrorism, which I think the US ought to consider, is what's known as the fifth column. And I think, where did that term, a fifth column, start? I think it was during the Spanish Civil War, where I forget what city was being attacked, and some general said, "Yeah, we've got 4 columns outside the city and a 5th column within the city." And especially in the case of the United States, which is a multicultural domestic empire at this point, the opportunity for a 5th column is pretty huge. I mean, you've got Marxists that hate the country, and they're acting out right now as in effect a fifth column in various cities like Portland, various ethnic groups like the Somalis in particular that were imported wholesale. And I can't get an answer from anybody. How did 200,000 Somalis get imported en masse, basically to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I think Portland, Maine is another epicenter of that. Who paid for it? I mean, who sustained them? You know, what are these people doing and why? And how are they selected? I mean, it's all very strange. So in the case of the US, if the US gets into a serious war with China, we're going to have fifth column problems from a number of points of view. Don't forget that one of the war crimes that we committed during World War II was rounding up 100,000 people of Japanese descent in California, and I guess all across the country, mostly there, and putting them in concentration camps and confiscating most of their property. I mean, this is an incredible crime. Will it happen again if there's a war with all these, racially identified immigrant groups? It's a good question, but I think it's going to be an element of the next war. But for the Chinese, it's not going to be an element because, the Han Chinese are very, very unified. Same racial group, same language. Yes, they speak 100 different languages, but they all speak Mandarin now. And so they're not going to have that problem that we're going to have if we get into a dust up with the Chinese. But let's see, talking about other things, when we're talking about hardware, with the hot war, so to speak, a hardware-driven war, I mean, these are other elements of it that we didn't discuss yesterday. I mean, interestingly, it can be said that the P-51 Mustang was the best or one of the best fighters in World War II. And most people don't recognize that that plane was basically designed and constructed from the get-go over a period of 3 months. I mean, and when it was delivered, a Mustang cost $50,000. So 3 months to get a superb product, $50,000. No, of course, $50,000 then, say $500,000, 700,000, something on that order today. How does that compare with the F-35? That thing is still with serious teething pains. They say, I mean, scuttlebutt that you pick up on various sites. It's very problematical. It's been in design for 30 years. That's how long it took to turn out a product which still isn't right. And it costs, who knows exactly, but something on the order of $150 to $200 million per copy. And I've got to say, it's probably all junk because the war isn't going to be fought that way, fighter against fighter and so forth. So that's a problem. We're fighting the last war again. These aircraft carriers, which even the new Ford class, I mean, what is that? Who knows, $15 billion a piece, full of F-35s, and the cost to run it, I mean, that'll bankrupt you. It produces absolutely nothing. It's immensely costly. And we're going to wind up with 12 or 13 of them. So,
right. Yeah. And it just seems like there's like a lot of technologies, there's a big leapfrog of technology that occurred while they were trying to get this F-35, into production. And a lot of that came in drones, and you have, which are inexpensive, readily available, pretty capable. And, they had an AI pilot dogfight against the Air Force's best pilot and lost every time and on dogfighting. Virtually.
Yeah, it's pretty much like that famous instance of where there was a contest between in the middle of the 19th century between a rail driver and the best steel driving man. There was a song about it. What was the
Yeah.
guy's name? I forget.
Was it Paul Bunyan?
No, it wasn't Paul
No.
Bunyan. He chopped down trees.
Right.
It was,
Okay.
he was a steel driving man. He was a black guy, actually.
Yeah. Yep. Oh God, I can't believe I can't remember it. Yeah, no, I definitely know what you're talking about. I could see the book.
Yeah. Anyway, the steel driving man, won the contest, but that was the last thing. After that, the machines took over, and the same is going to happen with the F-35. It's basically junk. Drones are much cheaper. They're going to be much more capable in all ways, cheaper and more capable. I mean, and with artificial intelligence, they'll know what to do. So
It was John Henry, Doug. I just Googled it. It was John Henry.
John Henry, that's who it was.
I had to Google it.
That's correct. So that's where that's going, but we just don't learn. I mean, they had the $500 million per copy. It's funny, you talk about $500 million, and it seems like nothing now, because with trillions being created like every month, I mean, it's meaningless. Like, hey, 500 million, come on. That's like pocket change or less. It used to impress people. Now it's meaningless. So this is all going to get more out of control. But so the B-2 is being replaced by the B-21. Who knows what that's going to cost? But it's the same problem that we're dealing with there. And where are we going to use the 6,000 or so M1 tanks that we have? Are you going to fight a land war in Asia against China? That is an absolute formula for disaster. So what are we going to do with these 6,000 tanks? Maybe another war in the Middle East against, primitive tribal type people? This is all crazy, but it's bankrupting the country. So anyway, where were we? The economics, it's going to bankrupt the US. And what's the next wave of weapons going to be is, I think that since science fiction is actually a much better predictor of what's likely to happen for a lot of reasons than any overpaid Washington, D.C. think tank, of which there are scores, hundreds of them. The Terminator series of movies were exactly where these things are going. I mean, we've all seen videos from Boston Dynamics of their big dog robot, and the fact that now the batteries are better. A bipedal robot can basically run around and do things. And
Doug, you can buy one of those dogs ones now for $75,000.
And the price will come down, and the capabilities will go up. Yeah, sure. I can imagine our high-tech soldiers being chased down by, this was a funny thing on one of the Jurassic Park movies, where they were looking to transform the velociraptors, and actually those weren't velociraptors. Those were a dinosaur called a Deinonychus. Velociraptors, technically, paleontologically speaking, are little things about 2 feet tall, but velociraptor sounds a lot better than a Deinonychus. I mean, who's going to pronounce that? But they wanted to turn them into, they wanted to weaponize the things, with a chip in the brain and all this type of thing. That's absolutely the way it's going to go. So I don't care how good a special forces soldier you are. I don't care if you're Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jason Statham put together. When you're being attacked by a swarm of these things, it's all over.
All over.
So that's how the hot war is going to go. And the way we're going is we're fighting the last war. It's inevitable. I mean, generals are not rocket scientists, which it's too bad that I think our next president in 2024, for lots of reasons, is going to be either a left wing or a right wing general. But so robots are going to be a big thing. Skynet is going to exist. And part of that, talk about Skynet. How about the war in space? There was a weapon which they were developing a decade ago, but you haven't heard about it since then. They said, it's not going to work. It's too hard to get the things up there. You remember they were going to have satellites positioned appropriately above the Earth with batteries of 3-meter long, like 6-inch in diameter tungsten rods that could be launched. Do you remember this?
Yeah, how these hypersonic weapons, yep.
Exactly. And when one of those things, since tungsten is got a specific gravity around 20 to 1, you know, it going through the air, it just gets faster and faster and faster. So it's like a small nuclear weapon when it hits. It's coming in so fast, like a meteor, frankly, and directed though, exactly where you want it to. So I'm sure they're going to be doing things like that, and undoubtedly the Chinese are thinking the same way. I mean, they're actually very smart about this and everything else. So that's going to be part of it. And of course, part of that is taking out all the enemy's satellites. And if you take out all the satellites, there goes the internet, and there goes cell phones, and there goes
all the weapons.
Yeah, of course that ties in a little bit with the electronic warfare we talked about yesterday, but this is very kinetic. So even more than electronic consequences.
This is kind of an aside, but I assume you saw some video footage of the giant explosion in Beirut about 6 weeks ago. Did you see that, the video footage of that explosion?
Yeah, I did. That was fascinating. Now, have they figured out who did it and the circumstances? Do we know anything yet?
No, all I've heard follow up on that, it was just 22,000 tons of ammonium nitrate that they had stored there. They'd offloaded from a ship and kind of kept it impounded, and it had been there for a period of time. But I'll tell you, when I saw that explosion, I didn't know what it was, but in the Army, calling in artillery fire from, calling in close air support from B-1 bombers, I'd never seen an explosion like that in my life, like nothing even in the ballpark of that. And when I saw it, I was like, it was hard to think it wasn't something like a tactical nuke or one of these tungsten, hypersonic weapons, because it was just so incredibly massive. And I'm not saying that's what it was. I have no idea, but I had never seen an explosion anywhere on the ballpark of that.
I wonder what 22,000 tons of ammonium nitrate was doing sitting there for years.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense.
It certainly doesn't make any sense. It certainly is just an egregious bureaucratic error of proportions that are just not, should never possibly have occurred, something like that. But I don't know. It was a crazy explosion. So just when I saw it, I go, boy, this seems like this is something else. At first, that's what my initial instinct was, because it was such a massive explosion. But if you're using one of these tungsten weapons, you wouldn't even know. I mean, it'd be impossible to detect the speed it's coming in at. It would have an explosion similar to that.
Yeah, it would. So it's quite, and we haven't even talked about nuclear weapons, which once again, it's a 70-year-old technology, even miniaturized and so forth, which is full of disadvantages. But if somebody wants to use a nuclear weapon as a strike, the most stupid way to do it would be to use an ICBM, which is, that's basically a dead duck technology too. If you want to deliver a nuclear weapon, you deliver it in a series of commercial airliners or transport planes or ships, just float it up to the harbor and let that puppy off. Or for that matter, put it in a UPS or a FedEx package. It'll arrive, the right place on time, cheaply. You don't need a multi-billion-dollar delivery system. So World War III is going to have all of these elements, and it's going to be, I think, quite ugly for that reason. Not even talking about what we were talking about yesterday, which are the big things. But actually, the next military technology that's going to trump them all is going to be nanotechnology.
Mm.
And once again, was predicted, or illustrated, I should say, very well in that remake of the movie The Day the World Stood Still. Because you might remember there was a scene there, instead of having the giant robot scaring the hell out of everybody, they basically had swarms of millions of little nanobots that would attack any target that you pick and just disassemble it, tear it apart, and presumably refuel themselves with the biochemicals from what they attacked. And of course, it's not just the big drones like the Predator and the Reaper. I mean, that stuff is neat, it works, but I think the real action is going to be in teeny weeny drones, which you'll be able to, which will be short range, of course, but each of them armed with a very small explosive charge, but zero in on, you know, a biological unit, which they can figure out, you know, heat or whatever, and you can't defend against them. And you can have millions of them. So the possibilities are just astounding for actual hot warfare, hardware type warfare. Forget about the 4 types we talked about yesterday. And I'm sure the US is working overtime on that stuff, even while it's still pumping money into its dead duck junk technologies. And the Chinese are working on this stuff too. So question is are we gonna fall into Thucydides' trap? And as the economy collapses, the odds go up, I think.
As internal conflict becomes greater, it's one for better or worse, or certainly I think for worse, but it's a unifying force. An external war is an easy way to, you know, to gain political power when you have such incredible strife happening inside the country.
Yeah, it is. And strife inside the country is well, that's part of what we talked about yesterday with psychological war, and part of what we talked about today with the possibility of a 5th column. But I think on this topic, we have to look at the different types of military. I don't think people examine this at all. And I figure there are 3 basic types of military. You've got a mercenary army, where they're professional soldiers, and you hire them to get the job done, okay? That's kind of what we have today, incidentally, with the all-volunteer army. The guys in the military today are mercenaries. They get pretty good benefits, and they're very well trained, and and I find that soldiers and police are loyal first to their buddies. That's number 1.
Yep.
Loyal first to your buddies. Second, you're loyal to your employer. It's obvious. And only third is whoever you're theoretically working for, the people, or whatever. They're kind of nebulous. So that's, having a mercenary army has got pluses, but it's very dangerous from that point of view. And what's the other kind of armies you have? Well, okay, you can have a slave army. Now that's an impolite way of saying draftees that are, you know, forced to be in the army, and they don't do what they're told. If they run away, which a mercenary army will tend not to do because they've got professional pride, you know, you shoot them, or you treat them like cannon fodder or whatever. So fortunately, we don't have a slave army anymore, which is, now you can say, oh, but there were advantages to everybody serving in the military. I understand, you know, with cohesion among the people and sharing an experience with all the other young males and all. Yeah, okay, that's neat. But still, it's coercion, and it's a slave army, and almost everybody that gets in wants to get out as soon as possible, and they try to skate as much as possible because this isn't what they want to do for a living.
Right. No doubt.
So you gotta, what's the third type of army? I think it's the most desirable type, and that would be basically a militia army, which is strictly defensive in nature. I mean, mercenary armies and slave armies, they can be used very effectively for offensive purposes. But a militia army, these are people that are organized locally for strictly defensive purposes, can be quite competent, don't usually use a lot of heavy equipment. You don't need it because, so I think that the US should go to a militia type army, which I think a lot of young men would want to join because it would be fun, it would be interesting, it would be pair bonding, this type of thing. Different from the other two types. But we're way away from militia. And you mentioned the word militia, and everybody thinks you're a right-wing lunatic. I'm just saying these are the three possibilities for types of.
Would you consider this the Swiss military, the Swiss citizenship military, the way they have it structured? That's kind of a militia, right? Like every.
It is a militia. It's an ideal militia army, except for the fact that everybody's obligated to serve in it, and I can understand the arguments that are made for everybody having to do that. Okay, don't approve of it, but I understand the arguments. But I suspect that Switzerland, because of its traditions and that, I think, especially if it was a voluntary militia army, that I think it would be much more of an honor to. Well, look at the Roman Republic. That was a voluntary militia army. Mm-hmm. In fact, in order to serve in the legions before the days of Marius, you had to be not only a free man, but you had to be a landowner to serve in the Roman legions.
Skin in the game.
Was a huge privilege to do that. So yeah, I think it would work. It would work for the Romans. I think it would work for us. And the Swiss, for that matter, if they simply made it non-obligatory, because the Swiss army is very well trained and all that, but still, nobody wants to be forced to be in it and do this stuff. It was voluntary. It would be a privilege, an honor. You'd have quite enough guys wanting to do it for some period of time. So
that makes sense. That makes sense. So when you think about the, I'm not sure how much more you have on this topic, but when you think about the hot war with China, if the U.S. as a waning power, China as a rising power, if our brilliant generals in D.C. seem to think that a hot war is our best shot, then they're likely to push that route sooner rather than later, you would think. And if they did, I mean, when you talked about a scenario where maybe it's around Taiwan where, China is trying to exert some territorial authority there. But, if it's something that the U.S. sees it as inevitable, the U.S. would probably begin it. And what would that look like if the U.S. were to begin it, in your mind?
I guess they would use their sea power. But would they want to go nuclear? That would be very dangerous because the Chinese have their own nuclear forces. I mean, incinerate each other's cities. Anything is possible now because, all of these things that we've talked about all exist, including nuclear weapons. They're still there. And mainly they're good for blowing up cities more than anything else. So anything is possible. I mean, how stupid are these people? Well, sometimes things just get out of control the way they did with the start of World War I, which nobody thought could happen and nobody wanted, but it did.
You start in some little tit for tat thing, seems unrelated, and all of a sudden, the energy is coalesced on different sides, and it's total war.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes, if the guys that run governments, want to have a war, I'm all for having a cage fight to the death, unarmed combat between whoever's running whichever country.
Yeah, pick your hero. Yeah, every side gets to pick their hero, right, to send in to fight in the cage. But it doesn't even have to be the leaders themselves. We could all choose the one to represent us.
Yeah, we could do that. But I still like the idea of the leaders because the leaders are the ones that start these wars. That's so they ought to bear the consequences of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. That'd be great. That'd be
Yeah,
great.
it would be. I mean, they can actually be productive. I mean, it'll be wonderful box office entertainment. I mean, would turn a profit element.
Yeah, they're definitely the biggest pay-per-view bet of all time.
Right. Yeah, Xi versus Trump and Xi. I'd probably have to go for Xi. I don't know much about the physical condition of either one of them.
Yeah, I think we'd end up. I think they would be spent within 30 seconds. You know, they'd just be totally exhausted, and out.
Yeah,
But then you got to feed them different weapons, right, to keep it interesting.
yeah, that's right. They'd both be hyped up with all kinds of drugs, and
Right.
I'm sure they'd both do some training beforehand, and it'd be very entertaining. Place bets on the winner. It'd be a lot of fun. And
That's the way to
incidentally,
resolve conflict.
Patty Power, which is probably the best predictor how people are betting with their money, still has Biden by about, I don't know, 10 to 20% edge over Trump come November 3rd. What do you think? Who's going to win?
I'm definitely. I think it's Trump, but I just think it's ultimately going to be decided by lawyers. I don't think it's going to. It's going to be. I don't think we're going to have it resolved on election day. But I think on election day it will look like certainly Trump won. I think. Just driving around, I think that the riots were really, really bad for Biden and the Democrats, and I think that there's nothing that motivates humans like fear. And when they see things actually being destroyed, things actually becoming dangerous, they're feeling unsafe. I think that drives people to consider voting that never would have voted, or would have made it a priority, or would have been too embarrassed by Trump's, personality, or too worried about being associated with him because he's just so, uncouth. Like, good people, smart people aren't allowed to like Trump. So,
but he's really entertaining. I mean, I really enjoy watching him do his thing. I don't enjoy watching Biden try to do whatever he's trying to do.
Honestly, it makes me feel sad when I watch Biden. I feel like he's being, it feels like some form of elder abuse. It really does.
It's almost like they railroaded him into it because he was about the only one of those 20 candidates that wasn't clinically insane.
Yeah.
Although maybe he is too. Just, it's awful. But anyway.
But we have a big debate tonight, actually, and I think tomorrow I'd love to talk about. Are you going to be watching the debate tonight?
Yes, I wouldn't miss it. Frankly, normally I'd miss it, but since this is the biggest election in American history, or certainly since that of 1860, I'll definitely be watching it. And if you want, I've come up with 6 reasons why I think Biden's going to win. Notwithstanding the point that you just made about the riots having, and I agree, but we can talk about that too if you want.
Well, I'd like to watch the debate tonight and then see if you still think those 6 things hold true. Because we did talk about the 6 before, which I understand, but I think with the riots, it might have edged things out a little bit. And I think a lot of things might have edged out, but I'd love to talk tomorrow about your take on the debate and how it went, and if it updates your thesis for how the election will turn out.
Yeah, unless there's something really disastrous or strange that happens, I doubt the debate's going to change anybody's mind because the country is so polarized. But, we can handicap it just the way the talking heads on TV do. Why not?
Yeah. Well, we'll do it better than they do. They're virtually useless, but yeah, we should try that tomorrow.
Okay, that's super. And I think we covered just about everything. I made a few notes that I could look down to see if I didn't, because this is pretty broad ranging, all the things we've talked about.
It is.
I think we've covered just about everything.
Well, let me have one more question for you. If we think that a war, a kinetic or a hot war is likely with China, what signs might we see in advance of it to know that that's coming? Are there any early warning signals that might exist that you think might pop up to let people know it's the risk has grown dramatically?
Yeah, and if there are, will the powers that be alert us to these things?
Mm.
That's another good question, because we all live in our own little bubbles, our own little silos, as it were. I guess the answer to that is you just kind of feel it in the air,
Mm.
what is announced and what seems to be done around the periphery, and how the average. I think it's a feeling as much as anything else.
Mm.
Anything specific? You don't line up troops on the border anymore. That doesn't happen.
Yep. I do remember after 9/11 when we were, we obviously went into Afghanistan, but then there was this feeling, this zeitgeist among the American people that we wanted more than that, and so Iraq became the target, and there was the drumbeat for war, was just growing, and not only by the talking heads on TV, who of course it's great for ratings, so they always love war, but I didn't. Everybody I ran into thought it was a great idea for us to go to war with her. I mean, I remember just thinking like, what are we doing? Most people aren't in the military, have no military experience. And I was like, having been in the military, luckily never had to serve in war, but I was like, you don't want to use this. Like we get nothing out of this. We just destroy things that we don't care anything about. That's it.
Yeah, destroy things and make
Enemies.
enemies. And those two wars, Afghanistan and Iraq, were among the most stupid and pointless in all history. I mean, just we could even talk about those things now that there's a little bit of history, and people aren't quite as hot about them as they were when they were hooting and panting like chimpanzees wanting to attack the supposed enemy.
Yep, you're right. But there was a zeitgeist then. There was a feeling in the air that it was almost where people wanted war. They wanted war, and it could have been just like, hurt from 9/11. If we want to lash out like a child and destroy things. I don't know, but it was in the air. I think that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah, that's true, and it was the same way after World War I started, where everybody wanted to join up because they were afraid that it was going to be over in 3 months and they wouldn't get their chance to, to exhibit courage on the battlefield. And it was the same during the war between the states, where everybody thinks, oh, it'll be over so soon, I want to get in it, and get a medal or something like that. So I guess you can pick up these things in the air.
Well, I will watch out for that vibe in the air, and hopefully it doesn't come up with this. And then we'll plan on talking tomorrow, rehashing some of the debate and what your predictions are after it.
Okay, fantastic.
All right, thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.